Dr. Kevin Roberts, welcome back.
Mark Guiney, it's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. So 2025 is now drawing to a close. It's been a momentous year for conservatives. Obviously, we've welcomed a new presidential administration, and many things have happened since then. For you, as you're looking forward into the next year, what are you going to take with you from 2025?
Well, a lot of positive and a couple of challenging things, including a tragedy. The positive, to start with that, is that we are learning, conservatives are learning what to do when we're in power. And what you do when you're in power, operating within the constitutional order, within the rule of law, is that you're aggressive. And so as we sit here just before Christmas, there's a report out that 271,000 jobs have been eliminated from the federal government. And that is a cost savings, to be sure, maybe in the tens of billions of dollars starting in the next fiscal year. But the real important sign there is that this is one of the long-standing desires of the conservative movement, and it took a populist conservative, Donald Trump, to deliver on it. And we ought to take great encouragement that something that Ronald Reagan commenced 45 years ago, which Heritage was part of, obviously, is finally being delivered upon. And the second thing is that we have tremendous examples of economic recovery. We're going to see more about that, I think, in 2026. We're cautiously optimistic here at Heritage among our economist colleagues about that. The third thing is this devolution of power from the federal government back to the people via the states is very much in motion. We see that in healthcare policy, in education, and we also see a presidential administration that I won't yet use the word unprecedented with this, Mark, but they're knocking on the door of unprecedented numbers of peace deals around the world. This is the heart and soul of conservatism. So I couldn't be prouder, just as an American, of what's going on in 2025. The flip side and the very tragic side of that is we lost, as you and I talked about, in the aftermath of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, a future president, someone who was really helping to hold the movement together. It's always a struggle, going back to the words of Edmund Burke, for conservatives to remain cohered, to remain unified when we're in power. Charlie was a massive force there. And so it's incumbent upon us as the calendar flips to 2026 to do two things. We got to continue to focus on the policy objectives that still are not yet accomplished. And they're not yet accomplished because the good guys have been in power for only 11 months. Heritage will play its role, as we'll talk about. But the second thing is, as it relates to some of the challenges and news cycles and all of that, we need to ignore that and just blaze a trail on behalf of the American people. Ignore the typical elite media outlets in Washington and New York who want to get us off our game, and let's go do the work of the American people.
Absolutely. So we said farewell this year to our founder, Dr. Ed Feulner, who, as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking a lot I always hear his quote in my head, which is, in politics, there are no permanent victories and there are no permanent defeats. But he was a man who was very much in the fight. As you've reflected on him this year, what do you take away from Dr. Feulner's legacy?
Well, a couple of things. The first, I, especially this time of year, particularly miss Dr. Feulner because he was usually the last person I met with for the calendar year in my office in person. It just sort of become our custom. And we would have this custom, well, how do you think the movement's doing? How do you think the nation's doing? And I mean, I miss him all the time, but especially right now. And that was always a wonderful conversation. There's always such great insight. Part of his legacy for us at Heritage was, the debrief, how are things going? Whatever the successes were, just know you got to go fight for them again next year, probably in Congress. Whatever the challenges are, let's go fix them and let's move onward, as he would say. The second legacy, though, that's really clear to me is that this is a movement that Ed built. He would, of course, give credit to others, and others deserve some credit too. And we see very much alive in the younger generation that spirit that Feulner had at the same age, which was great zeal and optimism for the future, but also a desire to get down to the real, authentic work that needed to be done to build the movement. And the last thing I would say is, as I observed at the memorial service we had for Dr. Feulner here at Heritage, which is unfortunately just days or weeks after Charlie's assassination, losing both of those giants this year has been really, really difficult. And the way we honor each man's legacy is to put what each of them offered together and build the movement on that. In the case of Feulner, the policies, the ideas. In the case of Kirk, the activism and the advocacy and the really good communication. Obviously, a lot of overlap there. And so for us at Heritage, we're operating with that wedded vision of those two giants of the conservative movement, and we're very privileged to do so.
For us in the conservative movement, of course, our goal is to secure the good life for all Americans. The good life is composed of a lot of things. It's hard to live the good life if we're in a state of, let's say, war. It's hard to live the good life if gainful employment is elusive. It's hard to live the good life if there isn't an education option for your kids that actually is going to help them to be successful. So for us at Heritage, there's a lot that we speak on and speak about. And it's really hard to figure out how we are going to utilize the resources with which we've been entrusted to address those issues. So in the upcoming year, we have kind of reimagined the way that we look at our work through the lens of the Four Cornerstones, four kind of buckets of policy that we want to look at all of our work through. Can you talk about how we wound up at this Four Cornerstone model?
Well, I'll touch on the internal process, which for some people might sound really boring, but actually it's very exciting because there are three things that converge to create these four cornerstones. And we'll talk about what the cornerstones are in more detail, I know. But one of them is just the longstanding policy work of our policy colleagues. So that all of our work, whether it's communications, packaging our policy ideas, the work that our friends and colleagues at Heritage Action do for issue campaigns, all of that begins with our research. So that's long running. The second is perhaps something that I might emphasize a lot, as you know well, and that is a sense of urgency. And I don't mean this to be alarmist by any stretch, but maybe with a little bit of drama to get people aware that this window of opportunity we have for conservative policymaking, for conservative reform, for the sake of self-governance, to go back to your very first point, could be short. It might even just go up until the midterms of 2026. But as you know, I think the good guys are going to be in power for the most part for the next 15 to 25 years. We've got to really understand that sense of urgency. But then the third thing is friends on the inside, friends on the outside, but most of us just as colleagues at Heritage started trying to answer the question, what are we going to do for America's 250th birthday? And obviously, we're celebrating its history. Our colleagues have come up with a Heritage Guide to Historic Sites. I'm very, very proud of that and have participated in that just as a colleague. But we also said it's incumbent upon Heritage, perhaps uniquely in the conservative movement, to answer the question, what is America 500? Which means we not only have to keep going with our policy work and our advocacy work on Capitol Hill and in state capitals, connecting the conservative network around the globe, which I also think we do uniquely from a conservative perspective. But we have to put this in a messaging package that makes sense. And in other words, our policy scholars can go into great depth as they do in their respective expertise. But in order to sustain this governing coalition, we have to talk about this in a way that is digestible. And that's what the Four Cornerstones are.
Great. So the Four Cornerstones are the American family, dignity of work in the future of free enterprise, national security, American heritage, and citizenship. So the one that's at the head there is the American family. You said that this is kind of all of these are important, but that this is sort of your focus for the coming year. Can you talk about why that is?
Well, look, it's going to be my focus and Heritage's focus until the end of time. And I could go, as you know all too well, all academic on you and give you the Aristotelian explanation for the importance of the family. And actually, that's really important. In short, you got to have a good family, strong families in order to have strong communities. You have to have strong communities to have, in our system, strong states. You've got to have strong states in order to have a right-sized federal government. So everything flows from the family. But we mean it in a more common sense way. And that is that as we have seen over the last 50 years, steadily declining marriage and birth rates in the United States, such that in the case of the latter, birth rates, we are no longer at replacement rate. I am not using hyperbole to say we're not going to have America as we know it if we don't figure out as a civil society how to address those two problems. Obviously, we honor individual choice and freedom and all of those things. But what Heritage is saying is even though we don't yet have a full suite of policy solutions, although we will be advocating for some in 2026. We must, as a conservative movement, we must, not just as a country, but as a people, address this question of the deterioration of the family, because as the family goes, so goes every other American institution. Why are American institutions important? Because it is American institutions, schools, Rotary clubs, bowling leagues, Little League Baseball, et cetera, where we mediate our differences, where we transmit our values from one generation to the next. So we reject wholesale anyone on any side of the political spectrum who say, this isn't the right question. Sorry for the passion there. You now see why it's number one of the cornerstones.
We love the passion. So tied into that, directly into that, the dignity of work. And for some people, I mean, this might even seem like a little bit of a trite anachronism. You know, we're in the age of AI. We're beyond this. We're beyond worrying about work. But of course, we're not. Can you talk about that?
It's precisely because of the age of AI and technology, both of which can be good, although both of which can be used for bad, that we want to emphasize this humankind long maxim that work is good for us beyond the paycheck. We like paychecks. We like economic prosperity. But something happens to our being, to our souls when we work. There's dignity for anyone who has an honest day's work. And while, of course, technology can be used for good, we want to be sure that as our colleagues are doing at Heritage, we scope out the right kind of policy approach to AI and to technology more broadly, that we're keeping at the center of that the human person. And yes, I know, especially in the quick news cycle with sound bites and an emphasis on really quick news, that talking about the human person, just that phrase, may sound a little outdated. But that's precisely why Heritage is embracing this, because if you understand the dignity of work, then as we argue in all of the work we're doing around this cornerstone, you better understand free enterprise. You and I and our colleagues at Heritage, Mark, have the privilege of working in the nation's capital, and it is a privilege. But there's also a challenging aspect of that. And often what we're combating on Capitol Hill or in state capitals is a corruption of the principle of free enterprise, such that what is really corporate welfare, a collusion between the biggest companies and big government, is presented to us at free enterprise, but that actually comes at the expense of whom? The people, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, workers, to be sure. This, we believe, to sum up here, is the long-standing conservative way to talk about the interplay of work and free enterprise. We're really optimistic that reframing it this way is sort of a reminder to friends in the movement, including policymakers, is a way that we can make sure that whether it's on AI or tech or questions of the free market or questions of work, that we get them right.
The fourth cornerstone is national security. And all of these are complicated, right? They are big buckets that contain a lot of things. But this one in particular on kind of two axes. One, we have a lot of crises breaking out across the globe. Of course, we have Ukraine and Russia. We have Venezuela. We have a variety of things happening in South America and Africa. And then, of course, we have what we refer to as the new Cold War, of course, with China. And then on the second axis, you have really this conversation within conservatism of how much do we really need to be involved in these various conflicts that are going on across the world. And this is a major conversation for us. So as you're looking at this bucket, national security, what's guiding you through this cornerstone?
Let me first say that there is no group of national security scholars on the planet who do more to do two things. Number one, to advocate for proper national security policy in the United States. But number two, connect this network of policymakers, other policy advocates around the world than our colleagues at Heritage do. And I want to make that claim on their behalf because they're very modest, they're very humble. And it is a direct connection to the heart of your question, which is about the importance of national security. that's self-evident, I think, to anyone on the political spectrum, from the person all the way to the left to the person all the way to the right. What we're saying at Heritage is we've gone through this era, when about 25 years ago, we told it was the end of history because the United States had prevailed against the Soviet Union. Thank God. Heritage had a role to play there too. But what's happened in the meantime is that the United States as a civil society, as the world's hegemon, the world's superpower, has been scuffling. It's been scuffling because of some deterioration in institutions domestically. It's been scuffling because we've spent far too many trillions of dollars on adventurous ideas around the world, which we may have thought were good ideas at the time. In hindsight, they weren't. And so what's happened is that Americans have become less secure. They're less secure when they walk out of their front doors, especially if they live in the big cities, but increasingly in suburbs. They're less secure, not just if they live near the southern border, but if they live in any county where illegal aliens have migrated. Our colleagues have proven that connection. And they're less secure because a lack of strategic clarity and vision by American policymakers, both Republican and Democrat, has led to a situation where the future of national security is in question. All of that to lead to an optimistic point. And that is, in part, because of the great work of our colleagues, in large part, because of the strategic clarity and vision of President Trump and his administration. We have every reason to be optimistic about the future. It's just that we need to sustain that, not over months and years, but over a few decades, to get back to, for example, the founders' vision of appropriate national security. We are very confident about that.
The last bucket, I think, is the one that kind of goes soul deep, I think, more than most of the others, which is American heritage and citizenship. And we've kind of crested this wave, it feels like, this long roll through the institutions of a philosophy that really believes that the American project is futile, or was kind of a fiction or a lie from the beginning. And so we have a whole generation of folks who probably would not call themselves proud to be an American, which is very different from any other time in our history. And now, as conservatives, we're facing this. And with the rise of the immigration crisis we now find ourselves in, we're having to answer very real questions about what it means to be an American. And I'll make your clarification on this part a little bit more complicated by also throwing in a really important point, which is at Heritage, we are very focused on America's 250th anniversary, as you mentioned, and that's really an opportunity to examine this whole question and put this cornerstone right at the forefront. So can you talk about what this means to you, American heritage and citizenship, and also what it's going to mean to the organization as we turn to America's 250th year?
Well, it's a huge question, and there are elements of it that are abstract, just as they were in 1776, when 56 men gathered to sign the Declaration of Independence, not merely for themselves, not merely for their generation, and for that matter, not merely for subsequent generations of Americans, but for posterity's sake, for the sake of humankind. And so while we honor the pride that anyone and any other nation state would have, we look forward to, for example, when the Communist Party is no longer leading China and the beautiful culture of the Chinese people can reemerge naturally. Just as an example, we as Americans are concerned, focused, and proud of our country first. But we've got a couple of complications. One of them is very obvious. When you have somewhere between 11 and 21 million illegal aliens come into the United States over a 4.5-year period, you cannot assimilate them, particularly because they're illegal, and many of them being hidden in sanctuary cities and counties and states as we sit here. But it isn't just a problem of illegal immigration. It's also a problem of legal immigration. We have, by some accounts, including by our colleagues, evidence that we have the highest percentage of foreign-born people in the United States in our history. Nothing against foreign-born people, nothing against any human person on the planet, but the reason that they want to come here is because of the very heart of this kind of abstract question. And right next to the heart is something very real. And it's the answer to that question: why do they want to come here? The rule of law. It's what the United States does really well. We can say the United States is the great bastion of self-governance and human flourishing, and that is true. But the reason it can be that is because of the rule of law. Think about how it is such a direct challenge. Illegal immigration is such a direct challenge to the very thing that causes people to want to come here. But it isn't just the rule of law that it violates, to come full circle here. It actually challenges what it means to be an American. It actually challenges what it means to call this place America. So that's the first problem. The second problem is, to be fair to our foreign-born friends, is that we don't do a good job of assimilating our native-born population. You know, going back to the earlier thread that we had about institutions, I know this all sounds very dour and negative, but you know I'm going to conclude on something positive.
Oh, I know it.
I'm getting there, I promise. Our schools have failed 2 generations of American children, not just in very poor educational attainment, but in something that to us at Heritage is just as important as reading, writing, and arithmetic. And that's inculcating in our children a love for this country, an appreciation for its past, an acknowledgement, to be sure, that as a human enterprise, it's imperfect, and it certainly has had its imperfect chapters. But there's something intrinsic in the American founding and therefore in the American ethos that makes us want, as a people, to fix on our own problems. Other countries have evidence of that, but nothing as profound as we do. Nothing on the order of that ethos of the United States. It's exactly what MLK was referring to on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial when he talked about the promissory note. He was literally referring to the Declaration of Independence, but it was a promissory note about what it means to be an American. So we not only have to fix immigration, we have to fix our schools. And the good news is we're fixing both. And so let us, with that tailwind we now have in the policymaking of immigration and education, take great solace, but hopefully great encouragement even, that we now get the opportunity, before we talk about further immigration policy, to talk about, as we're rehabilitating our institutions, that it isn't just sort of the concrete things that they do that's important. It's this very question. What does it mean to be an American? And let us use all of our respective celebrations of America's 250th birthday to be talking about that, to have a conversation with neighbors and friends and family, maybe even people who vote differently than we do, about that very question. And I'm going to make a prediction, which I do try to stay away from. But I will make a prediction here, Mark, that if we do that, if we just start doing that, our politics will improve. Because it's going to give us a context, a perspective that isn't capital R Republican or capital D Democrat. We want people to continue to have the right to vote as they want, right? But to ask a much more fundamental question. And that's what we're trying to do at Heritage, and also provide some answers.
So I'll throw you this question, which you have the habit of throwing at people. And I think I know what your answer is going to be. And we've gotten some taste of it here, but I'll give you the opportunity to do this. Are you hopeful for the future of America? And if so, why?
I'm as hopeful for the future of America as I was the first time as a young kid when I first started thinking about that, which is to say something, because, oh gosh, over nearly 40 years since that moment, there have been a lot of things that would cause any rational person to say, man, maybe the best days of my beloved country are behind it. We don't yet know if the best days are ahead, but it certainly feels to me like we're in the first year of America's golden age. And why? Policy successes, but also as I travel the country and visit with Americans, everyday Americans, even though we don't have all of the solutions in place yet for some of the big economic and social and political problems, although we think we will from the Cornerstones, people are talking about the right things. And I guess it might be the teacher in me, Mark, who takes great encouragement when people are asking the right questions, because I continue to have faith in my fellow Americans that if they're asking the right questions, we will come up with the right answers. And the last reason is the ever-present one, our faith. Yes, this is an era of supposed declining religiosity, but I think one of the most promising trends in all of the social science data is the revitalization of faith, the return to churches, to put it very pointedly, especially by young Americans. And you know why? Because they're seeking answers to these questions we're posing in those cornerstones. I think when we sit here in 5 years, 10 years, hopefully 20 years, and look back on this moment, we will say 2025 was the refounding of the United States, not in some political upheaval sense, although, Trump deserves some credit for disrupting a broken political system, but in the sense of Americans saying, we want to reclaim and revitalize those institutions that some really bad actors on the radical left took over. And we invite even those people to come back into the fold as long as they know that we want to save this republic.
Dr. Kevin Roberts, thank you very much. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Same to you, my friend. Thank you.